All right, so today we're going to be talking about coffee cupping, and this is something that will absolutely help you taste your coffee better, and you should absolutely try it if you are starting to get into the world of coffee. If you've ever seen flavor notes on a coffee bag like chocolate or nutty, maybe even citrus like grapefruit or berries, and you're like, how do I taste this stuff? Coffee cupping is going to help you figure out how to do that. And in the process, it'll help you discover what you like, both in terms of flavor profile, geography, all that kind of stuff. Super fun. But before we get into why it works, how it works, why it's a good thing, I'm just going to show you how to do it because that's probably why you're here. First, you're going to need however many coffees you want to cup. I'm going to use 3. It's really good if you can do more than 1 together. You'll need some similarly sized little tiny bowls or cups. You don't need to use anything crazy or buy anything special, and some spoons. If you got like a soup spoon or a couple, that'll be great. I'm going to use these special cupping spoons. I'll link to these down below as well. A scale, coffee grinder, and a kettle. Now I'm going to use what's called the SCA cupping protocol. That's the Specialty Coffee Association. We're going to keep things pretty loose, but I will link the full protocol down below if you want to go on a bit of a deep dive and look into how to do this. Short story is we're going to use 8.25 grams of coffee to 150 mils water. I have my kettle heated up here to 93 degrees Celsius. If you don't have a temperature control kettle, you can just heat it up to a boil and then let it sit off boil for a sec. So coffee cupping is all about comparison and comparing coffees together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to weigh out these coffees, about 8.2 to 8.3 grams each. This one is a pink Bourbon from Colombia, roasted by Sorolina Coffee. Second one is going to be a Guatemalan blend, Cadoay Caturra and Bourbon, roasted by the Angry Roaster. And this one is a Kenyan, couple different variety blends, roasted by Hatch. So I will link each of these coffees down below if you're curious. These are all Canadian roasters that I enjoy regularly. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at the different coffees and just make notes on how they look in relation to one another. So this one here, the last one, is kind of the most wrinkly in appearance on the outside. The central one, the silver skin that's kind of hanging out between the beans, that's the darkest out of the 3. And this one is kind of just very smooth, probably the largest beans out of the mix. And I'm getting some aromas right away. Some people like to make notes and kind of compare their perceptions, different stages of the cupping process. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to grind up each of these coffees. I use roughly a filter grind. The SCA protocol calls for a little bit coarser than that, so we're just going to go a hair coarser than what I would normally do for a pour over. And if you really want to go crazy, what you can do is before you grind each one of these coffees, you run just a couple of grams through the grinder of whatever the coffee is that you're about to grind. And that will purge out any leftover coffee that might be in your grinder to keep your samples clear and consistent. All right, step 2. Now we're going to smell the coffee grounds, and this is called fragrance. You just kind of want to note generally what you smell off of each one and how they differ. This one is very distinct. This is a Wilton Benitez coffee. This one is more grounded, more earthy, still a little bit of fruit on that. And then the last one, very distinct. I'm getting like red fruits off that. All right, so next step, now that we have our impressions on the fragrance, we're going to pour water over these coffees and start our timer at the same time. So we're not really gonna touch the coffees for, SCA says 3 minutes, you can wait even a little bit longer, 4 minutes. But what you can do is you can get a good whiff off of each coffee. Much more herbal off of this one than I was getting before. Very interesting. This one is feeling a lot more earthy, not in a bad way. Nutty, and this one is very fruity, like stewed fruits. So we're gonna let this sit until we get to about the 3 to 4 minute mark on our timer. I like to, if anything, give it a little extra time. So let's do some movie magic, and then we'll come back in a sec. All right, and we're at the 4-minute mark. So I'm gonna do what's called breaking the crust. And that's basically just taking a spoon and then stirring it 3 times. And we're gonna smell and take note on the smell as we do that. So I have some very floral notes coming out of this one. I'm gonna rinse my spoon off. You don't totally need to do that, but if you can if you want to. Yeah, very earthy, nutty cup. And then this one, you don't wanna stir too deep so that you don't stir up those grounds in there. Intense fruit. Once you've broken the crust of all 3, you can let it settle for a sec, or you can just go ahead and skim off those oils and any kind of particles that are left hanging over the top. And to do that, I use 2 soup spoons and I just stick them in like this, keep them together, kind of wrap them around as close to the edges of the cup as possible, lift them out, and rinse them off. And repeat that across each of the 3 cups. Now, when you're doing cupping, it's very helpful to do it with coffees that are as different as possible. So if you're dealing with 3 very similar coffees, it's going to be harder to pick out some of those differences versus if you pick a couple coffees from very different geographies, it's going to be a lot easier to pick out some differences there. So at this point, you want to let the coffees cool. If you try and sip them now, they'll be too hot to really get some of those tastes. So you should let it cool down to about 70 degrees. I just wait until we're at like the 10 to 12 minute mark. And by that point, you can really start to taste some of those flavors. So we'll pause and then come back. All right, so we're back at approximately the 12-minute mark, and now it's time to taste our coffees. Again, I'm gonna use this fancy coffee cupping spoon. You can just use a soup spoon, anything that'll hold a little bit of liquid in there. And what you're gonna do is you're going to let a little bit of the liquid into the spoon, and don't like scoop it way down in there because you don't want to disturb those coffee grounds at the bottom. You just want to put it just under the surface, let a little bit of that in, and then lift it up. And when you sip it, you don't have to do this. You can just duck it in and taste it and roll it around on your tongue and all that. If you want to try something a little different, you can do like a little puff of air in, like that. And what that will do is that will kind of spray the coffee over the back of your palate, get it up into that nasal cavity a little bit more so that you can taste it. So let's try that now. Lower body, very vibrant, very sweet also. I get like a lemon or lime citrus with a sweetness. This is a thermal shock, double anaerobic. There's like a little bit of a herbal note to that as well. If you're a big thermal shock person, you might know what I mean by that I find comes through often on these coffees. I quite enjoy it. Let's try this one here. So that is much richer, heavier body, nutty, something like a rich pastry. Very slight fruit, but like a dark, like a stewed fruit or like stewed berries maybe. And then this one, the last one. Yeah, and this is, that's very distinctly Kenyan. And to me, it's like almost like this very round, punchy, sweet orange or something like that. That's kind of how a Kenyan always strikes me, like this like mix of these red fruits or orangey fruits. And what you want to do is you can write down what notes you get, but then just go back and forth between each coffee. Wow. And when I jumped back from this one to this one is all of a sudden tasting like pie to me, like a berry pie. And this one, lots of florals, lots of very vibrant neon gummies, kind of. One thing you can do if you don't want to over caffeinate is you can spit actually into a spit cup. That's something that a lot of people do. It's very interesting. This coffee, I get a lot more vibrance and nuance when I'm coming from this side versus this side. Very interesting. So basically, that's cupping. And if you do that over and over and over again with a lot of different coffees, you're really gonna hone your tastes, what flavors you can pick out of coffees, and you're gonna discover what you like. Now, if you first start and you're like, they all kinda taste like coffee to me, start with like, this one is a little bit richer, or this one is a little bit thinner, or this one is a little bit more acidic. And then define that acidity over several rounds of cupping. Like, oh, I think that's like a berry acidity or a citrus acidity. So why does cupping actually work? the way it does. Brewing this way, tasting this way. Cupping is done all around the world. It's done at coffee farms. Sarah and I have done it at a coffee farm. It's done at coffee roasteries. Home enthusiasts do it at home. And it's done very often to evaluate the quality of coffees. And it's done because it's actually very easy to standardize and very difficult to do wrong compared to something like, let's say, a pour over. And that's because it uses something called immersion brewing, where basically you're putting the coffee grounds into some water and they're just steeping there. This is actually the same way French press works. And what's good about it is there's not actually a lot of variables. It's very simple, and the coffee is going to present the same way or very similarly every time, regardless of what kind of kettle you're using or even necessarily what grinder you're using. It's really just going to highlight how the coffee tastes and take a lot of the brewing mechanics out of the picture. And that makes it very useful for home enthusiasts for a couple reasons. Number one, you get a new coffee, you cup it, and you have a guaranteed representation of how that coffee should taste. So then if you go ahead and brew a pour over and it comes out like really bitter and gross, not at all like the cupping, you know you've done something wrong. Versus if you start with the pour over, you don't know if you did something wrong or if the coffee just tastes that way. Second, it's going to help you discover pretty quickly what you like and what you don't like in a cup of coffee. You may learn that you actually prefer heavier bodied, sweeter, maybe a little bit more earthy coffees, as opposed to some of these more expensive, very light body, very floral, maybe a little bit more tea-like coffees that actually cost way more, or vice versa. It's also going to help you start to pick out those flavor notes in coffees in different ways. And this is something that's kind of hard to describe until you actually try it for yourself. But when I was going across the table and then I got back to this one and then I went back to this coffee, like all of a sudden it just tasted like berry pie to me. And that's something that as you're doing this, you're going to discover more flavors, especially with the more practice that you get. And that's going to help inform you, oh, I really enjoy coffees from this region pretty specifically. Maybe when I go to try a new roaster, I'll just go and try and find a coffee from that specific growing region from this roaster. So if you've been watching this, I would love for you to try doing this, especially if you've never done it before. Just give it a shot, get some cups, get some bowls, get your kettle out, give it a try. If you need to approximate some of the weights and volumes, it's totally fine. Cupping is very forgiving. That's one of the nice things about it. Put your results in the comments and I would love to hear how it went for you. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, I'm always releasing fun videos like this. So go ahead and do that, and you can save this video for later as well. Just bookmark it for the next time you want to do a cupping. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time. Alrighty. Clean up, clean up.